Hey guys, Yasin here from the Fantasy Life app. I have Byron from Rosterwatch with me. We are doing another live stream today to go over and react to all news that's happening. Most recently, we have Joe Mixon. Looks like he's not practicing today, which means he's unlikely to play on Sunday. So I'm going to kick it off to Byron, let him take it with what's happening with Cincinnati and what to expect from this matchup.
Well, that certainly turned out to be a pretty thin play last week with Gio Bernard. Not quite the volume and the proficiency that we were hoping for. We really thought he might just slide right into that mix and roll and soak up a whole lot of the targets in that one last week, Yasin. Fortunately, we all were saved by the touchdown. That really made it a pretty respectable game for Bernard. He did deliver in the end, 76% snap count, 5 targets, 18 touches, 96 yards and a touchdown. I think if we can get that this week in the matchup at home against the Tennessee Titans, it's the number 8 matchup of the week and a 52.5 point game total. I mean, this looks like it could be a bonanza really for all fantasy players involved. So it's not a funnel to the running back by any means on the Bengals side, but it's certainly another good spot to roll Gio out in. He's going to be another pretty solid RB2 this week, Yasin. And I think if you're a Mixon owner, at this point, you're really hoping that this doesn't turn into a much longer term affair, especially if you don't happen to roster Gio, because it's starting to become a little bit worrisome.
All right, so Cincinnati is playing Tennessee, 1 o'clock Sunday game. We have other players on Cincinnati that we might want to pay attention to from Fantasy Outlook. I mean, Higgins is looking really good. You got a pretty decent quarterback there as well who's putting up numbers. Tell me about the other players on that team.
Yeah, 24 targets the last 2 weeks for A.J. Green, 87% snap count this last week. He hasn't been able to find the end zone yet. I happen to think A.J. Green a pretty good sell candidate on the fantasy football trade market this week. I think he's reestablished some value, and obviously he's still got the big name to boot. Look, Joe Burrow's throwing the ball so much that there's a lot to go around in Cincinnati. To me, it's become evident that T. Higgins clearly week after week is the guy that's able to do the most with the targets that he's getting. That said, the last few weeks, it's been A.J. Green with the target volume. We saw Tyler Boyd come with his own 13 target, 11 reception, 101 yard game, and he got the score last week. So truthfully, I think that you can play any of those guys as a really solid wide receiver 3 this week, Yasin. Higgins is the one I'm most bullish on keeping. I think they're all, going to be decent players the rest of the way, but Boyd and especially Green, I think, are good considerations to maybe try to sell high on to try to bring back a better player in return.
All right, so you're talking Cincinnati, AJ as a potential trade at strong value comparatively. Obviously, nobody's really excited or happy about what we've seen over the past few weeks. However, that's the advice that I think most people would agree with at this point. If you can offload, then we should go for it.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting. We saw our guy from the Senior Bowl 2 years ago, Drew Sample, at the tight end position, slide in at a 97% snap count on 6 targets this last week. And he was a guy that, he popped a little bit earlier in the season when Uzoma went down, and then he really wasn't able to deliver like some hoped off of the waiver wire as a streaming tight end the last month or so. But I do think that was another development that'll be interesting to monitor this week is the youngster Drew Sample, if he can continue with this kind of snap count, because he's a guy that can block and catch passes, and that's what keeps these tight ends on the field.
Yeah. So as we're staying in Cincinnati, let's talk about Gio. Are we starting him over Connor or Scott? I don't think you're starting him over Connor, in my opinion. I would say yes to Scott, assuming Mixon's not playing. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. James Conner, just other than that week 1 that had everybody scared as hell, man, he's really delivered on the season, and Baltimore's not the formidable matchup that they necessarily used to be. I think you keep plugging along every week here with James Conner, but I totally agree. Gio Bernard, he's going to get the nod over Scott for me. And again, we have Gio Bernard as basically a pretty high-end RB2 this week.
Okay, cool. Well, let's stay in Cincinnati with that game. They're playing Tennessee. Let's talk Cincinnati-Tennessee matchup. What is this matchup like? What's the point total expected to be? What do A.J. Brown? Let's talk A.J. Brown a bit and go from there. What is this overall score projected to be, point-wise?
Well, on the Week 8 matchup tool over at rosterwatch.com, Yasin, it's a sea of blue for the Tennessee Titans skill players. And what that means is that this potential bonanza, that means that these are all great matchups across the board. I think that what we've seen out of Tannehill is a guy that last year, his attempts per game, the sheer volume in that passing offense was pretty worrisome. We've really seen that grow this year to the point where Tannehill is it's the number 9 matchup of the week on the road at Cincinnati, who's been really, shooting out a lot at 52.5-point game total. Tannehill, you continue to feel very, very good about at this point. I mean, he feels like he's locked himself in as a quarterback one in this situation. Of course, Derrick Henry is always all system go. This is a good matchup. And Tennessee's favored by 5.5 points. We'll see how that plays out. I'll be curious to watch that. But, as we always discuss, we like that positive game script for our running back. So definitely a really good situation potentially for Henry. I think it's a bounce back spot, Yasin, for Jonnu Smith. Look, he's had 2 really bad fantasy games the last few weeks after starting out the season on fire. I don't believe it's a coincidence that Jonnu Smith has seen this swoon in production at the same exact time that A.J. Brown has come back to life and just began tearing it up. That is probably no coincidence. That said, I think it's very difficult to argue that Jonnu Smith is not a solid tight end one play the rest of the season, given the state of the position. He's actually, I usually don't get out of my way to trade for a tight end, but I'll tell you, if I could pick up Jonnu Smith this week for cheap in my league, I would look to him to fill to relieve me of that headache the rest of the season. Just plug him in from here through the end of the year at my tight end. It's the number 2 matchup of the week for fantasy tight ends for the Tennessee Titans and Jonnu Smith. And then you said it, A.J. Brown, he's looked magnificent. Yasin, a guy that I've been to his pro day, a guy we've scouted, down in Mississippi, a guy we've scouted very, very intimately. And I mean, we have him right now. I know there's been a little bit of injury concern. I think the last word we got yesterday, that everything looks good for Brown. We have him as our number 3 receiver of the week.
All right. So tell me more about rest of season Tennessee. Again, they're playing Cincinnati, where it looks like Joe Mixon. So far, it looks like he will not be playing on Sunday because he's not practicing today. He hasn't practiced for a while now. It looks like Gio is in line to have RB1, to be the RB1 of that team. So Gio is going to be slotted in. That was a fantastic pickup if you did pick him up last week. And I think the arguments could be made that, for example, that Gio should be starting over Scott and be where do you have him ranked, by the way, at Rosterwatch this week?
Gio, we have him at our number 14 running back at the moment.
And that's assuming Mixon doesn't play, because that news just came out.
Yeah, assuming Mixon doesn't play, because that exactly. And which it appears that we're trending in that direction.
Yeah, so I'm expecting Mixon not to play. And I think we have some good fantasy relevant things happening in that Tennessee-Cincinnati game. So we talked AJ Green. He had a little bit of a bounce back, and he might be a trade at high value candidate at the moment, especially if you're frustrated with him so far. And then we have Gio, who's obviously he has another good matchup this week with Joe Mixon not expected to play. That said, the 52.5-point game total, that's pretty healthy. And we also have A.J. Brown, who's looking really good the entire season, who you think is going to have who's going to be a good wide receiver one the rest of the way. And you also have Tannehill. And I think bigger question marks around Tannehill and his fantasy production for the rest of the season. What do you guys have for Tannehill down the line? What does his workload look like?
Well, let me take a look at his schedule here very quickly, Yasin. So this is a guy who's, like I said last year, sometimes only have 18, 20 attempts a game. We're seeing a player at this point. Let me see how many attempts per game we have Tannehill at. 33.83 attempts per game on the season. It's a middling number, but it's a big increase over last year. And so let me look at the schedule here. We got Cincinnati. I'll tell you what, the next 2 weeks aren't going to be super easy. They are going to be at home in Nashville, but it's the Bears and the Colts, 2 of the more difficult defenses, especially those Colts on the docket. So, Tannehill may not be a must-start player the next 2 weeks. Then he's on the road at Baltimore in week 11, which it isn't the same difficult matchup it used to be, but never easy, and then back on the road in week 12 at Indianapolis. So you raise a good point. Makes me wonder if you're a Tannehill owner, Yasin, and maybe you've looked ahead on this, but it could be, he might not be a must-start guy the next several weeks. I think you raise a good point.
Yeah. All right, we're going to jump over to the Jets game because we just found out that Jamison Crowder is not going to practice today. It looks like he will miss Sunday's game per the coach. So I would say let's talk there. And hey, Byron, is it possible for you to increase your audio at all? I think your volume is a little low.
Yeah, let me see what I can do here.
Maybe try yelling into your microphone.
Let me see if I can pump this up a little bit. All right, is that any better? You got a little more juice there? All right, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Let's talk Jamison Crowder. Let's talk Jets. Jets are playing Sunday, 1 o'clock against the Chiefs. Le'Veon Bell revenge game maybe, but let's talk Jamison Crowder first and what that offense looks like for the Jets.
Well, it's great news, not for Jamison Crowder, but it's great news for us because our guy is Denzel Mims from Baylor and the Senior Bowl, and this is a guy that if you're in a competitive league, you've probably already considered picking him up. If you didn't this last week, I think that you'll be taking a long look at it over the next week or two. He's the last guy from a recent lineage of dominant Senior Bowl wide receivers like Cooper Kupp and Terry McLaurin and others that we've seen in recent years that it really translated. Deebo Samuel translated immediately from a great Senior Bowl, a dominant Senior Bowl, to a rookie who was able to contribute. And Mims he's a really nice player, Yasin. I think we saw him come right in last week, slot in for 7 targets with the Jets, the rookie who's coming off the hamstring that kind of had him laid up the first half of the year. And it's not an easy matchup this week. I mean, this Chiefs defense, man, I mean, this has turned into a heck of a defense. It's really the second worst matchup on the slate for fantasy wide receivers. So I'm not sure you're rolling, Mims out yet. It is a 49-point game total. The game's on the road at Kansas City, but to me, this will be an interesting one to see if he maintains that target share, because if so, I do truly believe that a lot of folks are going to want to look to make sure that they roster Mims. He could be a guy that could produce and contribute here down the stretch.
So to recap, Jamison Crowder very likely to be out. Rashad Perriman is just confirmed to be out. He has a concussion. He's going to be out. You really don't have many weapons on that offense. You're going up against the Kansas City defense, which doesn't yield a lot to opposing wide receivers. So you're saying maybe sit the entire Jets offense like most people do most weeks, except for hold on to Mims for potential value down the line.
Look at this. The Jets are almost 20-point underdogs in this game. I don't know if I've ever seen that, Yasin. 19.5 points. So you could also make the argument that they're going to be in that negative game script that's going to call for a whole lot of throwing. And I don't think that Mims is necessarily a guy that they're going to bench if they start getting blown out. Maybe they'll turn to their second team. But I think it's more of he's the guy to keep an eye on in this Jets offense. And you mentioned not only is it Crowder, now it's Perriman. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. And by the way, if for some reason you're in a super competitive league where you've got to play some really trashy player, the other guy you could look at is Braxton Berrios, another player we've scouted live at the Senior Bowl. I believe he was out of Miami.
I mean, we're talking really deep leagues at this point, though. If you have to start a guy like Braxton Berrios, we're talking to a small percentage of people that are playing fantasy.
Probably true, but the questions we get over at rosterwatch.com, these are the kinds of things that keep me up at night, Yasin.
All right, so let's talk about the other side of the football. Jets, Chiefs. I mean, this is one of those games where they might actually sit Mahomes at the middle of the third quarter. So I'm expecting them to run all over the Jets. What are your thoughts here? And I think a lot of questions are going to come out about what to expect out of Le'Veon Bell. And I'm not sure that anybody has a crystal ball to know. But let's talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a blow-up spot for Bell. It certainly could be. I like him this week. I was hoping I was the only person that was going to think that's sneaky, but clearly not. Everybody is looking at a revenge game. And, we saw Le'Veon Bell look pretty good and start to get somewhat involved last week. You would expect in a game where they're, projected to absolutely blow out their opponents. I mean, all of it makes sense. And we want to be rational actors when we're making these decisions, the best decisions we can with the information we have at hand. And, it was only 6 touches last week for Le'Veon Bell on a 33% snap count. But boy, you wouldn't be surprised to see Bell go for 15 touches in this one, Yasin. So yeah, I think he's a guy you can play if you need to.
Yeah, Bell had 4 touches last week, I think.
Let's see here. I got 6 touches, 39 yards, 33% snap count in week 7.
Yeah, I think he's obviously going to have an uptick, and I really do think that he's personally going to push to play quite a bit that game. So I think it's an interesting script to look at this week. So we discussed most of the Jets and Chiefs. It looks like Sammy Watkins I don't know how much longer he's going to be out. But let's touch briefly on the wide receivers there on that team. And let's include Travis Kelce there. I mean, maybe we don't even need to because it's obvious, but maybe you can give a quick rundown of what you expect out of that team moving forward.
I mean, it's a great matchup for Travis Kelce. It's the number 8 matchup of the week for fantasy tight ends. So I think, even though you were concerned, look, it's like our good friend, the trash man over at Rosterwatch says, for these things to turn into blowouts where you're concerned about players getting sit in the second half or the fourth quarter, they have to get to that point somehow. They have to score a lot of points to even be in that position. So I don't think we try to get too scared about that. So I think you feel good about Kelce. It's a middling matchup for the wide receivers, which is obviously for the wide receivers and for Mahomes for that matter. So, I mean, that's no concerns there. You're our Tyreek Hill owner. You're rolling him out. I mean, I think maybe it's a week where you pull back on the Mecole Hardmans of the world. Like you said, we're probably not talking to a big audience when we're discussing those fellas. I think you probably back off anybody that's not a preeminent player on the Chiefs, side of things.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump really quick back to Tennessee for a quick minute because we've got a ton of questions asking about Tannehill. We have Tannehill or Burrow. We have Tannehill and I think we got 4 or 5 questions in the last few minutes just asking about Tannehill. So let's do a quick round where I'm going to try to find as many Tannehill questions as possible. You let me know if you're starting him compared to the alternative. So Tannehill, Burrow, who you got?
Tannehill.
Okay. We have Herbert or Tannehill.
Herbert.
Let's go.
We got those guys actually tied, but I'll give the nod. I'll give the nod to Herbert on that one.
Okay.
Ranked spot higher.
I think we just did Tannehill or Burrow. Sorry, I didn't listen to your answer. I'm just finding the questions here. Let's go.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's go Brady or Tannehill.
Tannehill.
Okay. And then we have a question of dropping Tannehill to pick up Tua. I think this is very situational. Maybe if neither one of them you're expecting to be your QB1, I don't see a reason to drop Tannehill for an unproven rookie at the moment who doesn't have snaps with the first team offense in a real game, really. That's meaningful, in my opinion. So I would not do this.
I don't hate it if you're looking for a stash quarterback, but I kind of question the strategy of looking for a stash quarterback in the first place. I mean, if you think he's going to be Justin Herbert, then you're going to look like a genius if you do it. I guess the other concern I'd have is I wouldn't want to drop Tannehill and let somebody else pick him up and play him this week. I would consider, I would make sure that that's not going to come back to bite me either.
I think Tua's a riskier roster spot.
Totally.
So I'm personally holding on to Tannehill. All right, so let's move on to a different game. Let's talk Patriots and Bills. Every year this is, hey, how many points are the Patriots going to beat the Bills by? I think this is a completely different scenario this time. I mean, let's talk Patriots versus Bills.
Well, it's the lowest projected game total of the week, 41 points. I mean, you and I have been doing this for several weeks now. I'm not sure we've discussed a game total that low, Yasin. That's pretty abysmal. On the road, New England on the road at Buffalo, 4-point underdogs. Pretty good matchups across the board from a fantasy perspective for the New England skill players. The problem is there aren't really many New England skill players, I think is a fair way to put it at this point on the offensive side of the football. And then I think we just got some news about Stephon Gilmore on the defensive side come through. We may want to have a look at that. And then think when you turn to the Bills side, I mean, it's not it's not a real favorable matchup for Josh Allen, who's been struggling. I think these two teams tend to probably maybe play a little bit of a closer game than you might expect, even when the Patriots aren't the Patriots that we've come to know and love. Certainly, if we have Gilmore out, that would be something that would make you feel a little bit better about Josh Allen. I think the one to watch in this one, Yasin, is what happens with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary. Singletary had really the opportunity to start putting a lock on this job. He wasn't able to do it. I think we saw his measurables from the combine a couple years ago pop up here. He's an elusive player, but he doesn't have the big time NFL juice that's really sustainable. So it was Moss who was injured and kind of taken out of the picture there for a few weeks, finally reintegrated last week, began to look like the better running back, the more efficient guy. He's the bigger body, more traditional player. It's far from a guarantee, and I think he's still a little bit of a stash at this point, but I'm very, very interested in A, rostering Zach Moss, but B, just seeing what happens this week with that backfield. I think he could begin to become a flex play and might even have a chance to begin taking the lead in that backfield.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about John Brown for a minute. Somebody's just asking a question about John Brown. I think the question is he going to be playing? And the answer is we don't know yet. I think he's going to. But what do you have? What are your thoughts about John Brown the rest of the season?
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that Josh Allen's swoon has been at the exact same time that John Brown's been unavailable. I mean, you got to remember, John Brown was his guy from last year. Diggs is new to the team. As a matter of fact, Diggs was even playing better when John Brown was in there opening things up. And John Brown really had a nice start to the season. I mean, if you rostered John Brown early, you were pretty happy with what you were getting out of him. So I think he's valuable to that team. To me, it's a little bit more of a wait and see. Let's make sure he's healthy. Let's see what that offense begins to look like. So he's probably more like a wide receiver 4 from my perspective this week. But if you had to play him, I mean, I wouldn't blame you. You could do worse.
Okay. Any other thoughts on any Bills players or Patriots players before I turn it specifically to Cam Newton?
Well, we should keep an eye on Damian Harris too, the second-year running back out of Alabama. I mean, I think what we know is that ultimately it's going to be very difficult to trust the Patriots running back situation, which is by no means a new revelation, but this is a different iteration of the team. And I think there's a lot of hope that a young guy like Harris might be able to start taking some sort of a lead in this deal. Hadn't really seen it, but we hadn't seen it in recent weeks like we're hoping. But this last week, he did begin to rear his head again. He did get the lead in the backfield this last week. He was fairly efficient. So that's another one to watch is let's see, does Damian Harris go back-to-back weeks getting a little love from that coaching staff? Is he a guy we can begin to maybe be a little more optimistic about rest of season?
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's move over to let's talk Raiders-Browns. Raiders-Browns, I think they both I think people love to hate each of these teams when it comes to regular football. I don't know about fantasy-wise. You always find some nuggets on both teams, but I think both of these teams are just not generally liked by most people, or people enjoy disliking these teams. But we're looking at it from a fantasy and sports betting perspective. What do you see as opportunities on both of these teams? I think they both had mixed but overall very positive showings. Specifically last week with the Browns, and then the Raiders they've had a decent run up to where they are now. Let's talk about both sides. What is it? First, let's kick it off with the overall total points expected for this game. Where do you guys have it?
Well, two of the most cockamamie fan bases in all of football, the Browns and the Raiders. It's a 50.5 point expected game total on the sports books. The Browns actually favored by 2.5 points at home. I don't think that's a huge surprise. It looks to be chock full of good fantasy matchups. Really surprisingly, maybe not totally surprisingly, Derek Carr has become a pretty viable fantasy quarterback this year. I think if you're having to kind of like scrounge around in your league for a guy, you can look to Carr this week if you're in trouble. And on the other side, I'd say the same thing about Mayfield. Even though he's down Odell Beckham. He's, Rashard Higgins is a guy that we've scouted up close and personal that Mayfield seems to have a chemistry with. And really, it's not just him. We saw Donovan Peoples-Jones, an absolute, terrific athletic size, speed, weight profile as a NFL receiver. Didn't really get the production in what was a pretty sad Michigan college offense. I don't think it really told the true story of him. I think he's an interesting guy to watch because everybody's thinking Higgins right now. Peoples-Jones is like, he's the big time X that can make big plays down the field. He's a bigger body than anybody had or anybody else they have on that team. And he actually slid in last week. Peoples-Jones slid in for a surprising 69% snap count. It was only 3 targets, but 56 yards and a touchdown. I think he's like an interesting guy to watch. And then, we saw that without Austin Hooper last week, we were talking David Njoku. We got saved by the touchdown. You can't forget that the Browns organizations, they've soured on Njoku. He's not the future. There's still rumors that they would like to trade him before the deadline. And that brings into focus Harrison Bryant, the young tight end and a guy that showed out pretty well throughout the NFL draft process. 77% snap count, 5 targets, 56 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. I'd say if you're looking on the Brown side, like Harrison Bryant, if you're in tight end hell, is kind of a sneaky play this week.
Cool. All right, let's talk. So you talked Derek Carr with the Raiders. You didn't really touch up on Baker too much. Let's talk about Baker. Was this a fluke last week? Is he better off now that Odell is no longer with him the rest of the season? I mean, maybe there was some mental pressure there that was affecting his play. But let's talk a little bit about Mayfield because I'm seeing him being picked up in a lot of leagues on the transaction wire. What do you guys have for Baker, not just this week, but moving forward?
Lord have mercy. It was a 5-touchdown monster for Baker Mayfield in week 7. He's got a great matchup this week, and then it's a bye next week, Yasin. And we don't like to look too far out with any of these guys, but on the backside of the bye, man, it's a home game against Houston, home game against Philly, and then at Jacksonville, at Tennessee. I mean, really, you can make the case that his next 5 matchups are pretty solid. The only thing you're going to have to absorb is that week 9 bye. So, yeah, man, I think if you've kind of zeroed in on Baker Mayfield, it's not a guarantee, but I think it's kind of sneaky good at this point. So Baker is a guy you can absolutely start if you have to this week. We have him like as a pretty high-end quarterback too. Maybe I might have to look at that and give him a little bit of a bump here. The issue with him on the season has been really he's been a low volume passer has really been the issue. But look, no Nick Chubb. They haven't necessarily been able to ground and pound the same way they want to. So yeah, I think Mayfield is kind of sneaky. And then, the other guy that's sneaky in this matchup, Yasin, is Nelson Agholor. If you want to look to the Raiders side, he is a deep wide receiver consideration that I would seriously consider playing even in the 12-team league this week if I was in a real bind at flex or wide receiver 3. He's established himself the last few weeks and he looks good and he gets another good matchup. I think it's a sneaky spot for Nelson Agholor.
Okay. All right, let's talk. Let's help this guy out so he can go to sleep. And he called us blokes. So let's ask this question really quick. He needs an RB2 out of Moss and Jamal Williams and a wide receiver and flex out of the remainder. Sorry, man, you didn't even give us the options. I see 2 options here, so unfortunately, we're gonna have to skip that question.
Well, look, if there's no Aaron Jones, it's clearly going to be Jamal Williams. I can give him that much.
Yeah.
Do we have any more word on Aaron Jones this morning? I mean, it sounds like they're taking it very slowly with him and cautiously.
Yeah, not they will not rush him back. That's the word on the street.
Well, dude, let me give you a testimonial, Yasin. I mean, I won a must-win week last week because of the Fantasy Life app. I was the first one in my league. To pick up Gio Bernard, Antonio Brown, and Jamal Williams last week. It was instantaneous pickups. It was the absolute waiver wire trifecta. Gio Bernard, Jamal Williams saved my skin, got me a must-win, and I was able to flip Antonio Brown in a trade last week after picking him up off the waiver for another guy that I was really going to need moving forward. So, Fantasy Life app, man, coming through.
Glad to be of service. Very, very proud of the alerts that we have. All right, so let's talk. We're gonna ask a few more questions, but this is a unique question. We haven't had this one asked before. Sleeper IDPs. I'm not in an IDP league this year, so I can't answer this question. I don't know who's a sleeper this year, but do you have any sneaky pickups on the IDP?
Yeah. Patrick, you look, IDP. If you're in like a single IDP league, which is probably what he's referring to, most formats, the safest play is to look for a linebacker that averages a lot of solo tackles.
Yep.
So, in this case, Patrick Queen on the Baltimore Ravens side of things is a sneaky guy. Devin White, the young stud linebacker for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, is sneaky. I think you can look at Bobby Wagner over in Seattle this week. Yasin, he's got the 49ers coming to town. He's been pretty good. And then Fred Warner over on the 49ers seems to be a pretty solid linebacker play. And Darius Leonard of the Colts had a slow start to the year. I'm not sure he's going to be the tackling machine this year that he has been an elite IDP in years past, but he got dropped in a lot of leagues because of the bye. So if Darius Leonard's on your wire, he's always an interesting pickup at IDP.
All right, let's move back to regular fantasy. This is a decent question that I want to talk about in two pieces. You answer the second, I'll answer the first. So first is if Allen Robinson misses time. At this point, you should expect him to miss time. I think the expectation is that he will miss this week. I think the team is certainly preparing to play without him this week. So I would have a backup plan for Allen Robinson. Now, the second part of the question is, assuming he isn't playing this week, Darnell Mooney or Cooper Kupp?
Well, everybody's raving about all the air yards that Darnell Mooney is getting right now in Chicago. He's kind of operating from that perspective superior to everybody else there. Let me take a look at these matchups. So we have Darnell Mooney. It'd be the number 12 matchup of the week at home against the Saints, a 43.5 point game total, which I'm just not sold. I'm afraid that game's going to turn into a little bit of a slog. And let me see Cooper Kupp here. We're going to get the Los Angeles Rams at Miami. It's a middling matchup. Dude, I'm going to go with I'm not going to outsmart myself. I think Mooney is a kind of a sharp, deep play, but Cooper Kupp it's not been the wide receiver 2 you were hoping for this year, but I think there's a bounce back in store for him on the horizon. And at the very least, he's always a solid wide receiver 3.
So while we're talking Chicago, it's important to note that Khalil Mack did miss practice again yesterday. I think it's unclear what his status is going to be. I think we're hopeful that he's going to be playing this week, but it's certainly not guaranteed. So let's talk a little bit about the Saints and the Bears. Who do you have from a fantasy standpoint on both sides of the football there, and who are you paying attention to? Who are you a fan of? Who are you fading this week?
Well, it's disappointing that it's sounding like Allen Robinson's not going to be available because, and truthfully, he's going to become even more of a buy low candidate after this. But he's based on 2 pretty weak performances in recent weeks and just how bad the Bears look. Robinson, wide receiver 25 on the season in half-point PPR formats. I mean, we know that. I think he is a wide receiver 2 and basically always has been in his career. But we know he's better than wide receiver 25. So first off, if we were hoping for a bounce back and a pretty good matchup for Robinson this week, but he's got 2 more good matchups after this, the next 2 weeks. So I think a good place to start is if you could pick Allen Robinson off for cheap this week. He's an interesting guy I think you can get that can help you win the next few weeks. I mean, really, where else can you go? I think you can start Jimmy Graham. I mean, we talk about this every week. We're like, is this 2012 or what, man?
Yeah.
But yeah, Jimmy Graham has come into focus as a player that you can start if you need to. I think he's a low-end tight end 1 or a high-end tight end 2 this week. And then other than that, I mean, really at this point, you roll out David Montgomery begrudgingly just because he's the only guy that they have. Matt Nagy has a penchant for making no fantasy player looks good in that offense or under his coaching. I don't care who it is. And Montgomery is a player who needs volume. He always has been. I think he would be a lot better if he got it. So maybe no Allen Robinson, maybe playing a Saints team that's not going to put up the points that we're accustomed to. I think maybe you can be a little bit hopeful that you can squeeze a touchdown out or get a little better performance out of David Montgomery this week. But I'm not getting too excited because it is a number 25 matchup of the week, and it's kind of a low point game, a low game total. So I think Montgomery, you treat him as like, I'd really love to just start him as a flex this week. I don't even really like him as my RB2 if I don't have to.
Got it. All right, so we have a few questions coming in that I think are relevant to some of the conversations we've been having already. Because we did talk about Raiders and the Browns. We didn't actually compare Baker versus Carr this week. Who would you start if you had to pick between the two?
Well, I'll tell you what our rankings have. Right now, we have Derek Carr as our quarterback 13 and Mayfield basically as our quarterback 15. So we have Carr ranked ahead. I mean, I guess I would go with Carr in that. From that perspective, I think the main hesitation with Mayfield is just, he's down Odell. He's down Odell. We got to kind of maybe want to see it this weekend first. I don't know. That's a very close call.
It's still Baker Mayfield. It's still the Browns. Yada yada yada. Yeah.
Right.
I'll tell you the pop culture version of it, which is it's still Baker Mayfield and still the Browns. I would personally go Carr.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes me feel better.
Oh, we lost you. All right, guys. Well, I'll answer some questions then as Byron comes back. Let me just write a note to him really quick that we lost him. Okay, guys. So we have some questions coming in. Should I try to trade for Mike Davis as a CMC owner? So here's my thought on this. At this point, hang tight. So at this point, I think it's dependent on the rest of your roster, right? If you can afford the space on your roster to be able to hang tight, guys. I'm just gonna send Byron the invite again. Sorry about that. So if you can afford the roster space, I don't think it's a bad move to hold Mike Davis as a CMC owner. However, I would not expect this to become I certainly wouldn't expect him to produce next week. I wouldn't really expect either of them to produce heavy numbers the first week that CMC is back. What I would look to do is, if I can afford it, I would hold off. Welcome back, Byron. I would hold off on adding. I would add Mike Davis as an insurance against losing CMC again to re-injury. That's why I would hold Mike Davis or try to trade for Mike Davis at the current moment. However, if you think about if somebody is going to hold on to Mike Davis as a non-CMC owner, they probably won't. So it's not a bad strategy to actually hold off and wait for that person to drop Mike Davis instead of you paying a premium for somebody as the CMC owner, because my guess is in most scenarios he's going to be dropped once CMC comes back. So just as a handcuff, re-injury is always an issue with any injury, anybody who's out for a certain amount of time. So Mike Davis is a good handcuff. I wouldn't overpay for him at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, maybe give up something small just to make sure, but otherwise probably going to hit your waiver wire, like you said.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move over to Minnesota, Green Bay. Minnesota, Green Bay, they both have, I mean, Devontae Adams is putting up quarterback numbers last week. Let's talk about Minnesota, Green Bay. What do you guys have as the point total?
All right, let's see. So Minnesota at Green Bay, they are 6-point underdogs. It's a 51-point projected game total by the sports books, and it's these are all pretty good matchups across the board. Probably the most difficult matchup in that game is going to be the matchup for the Vikings tight ends, which I don't think anybody's really paying too much attention to or planning to start at this point. So, I mean, this one should be a great game for fantasy. I mean, in DFS, this is probably going to be one of the games that'll be one of the core stacks in a lot of our builds.
So let's talk about specific players then. I mean, Minnesota, you have an awesome rookie putting up really strong numbers there. And you have a somewhat struggling quarterback. Tell me about the Minnesota offense in general.
Well, I mean, clearly we're getting Dalvin back. You're super pumped about that. It's the number 5 matchup of the week. This has been a good spot for running backs against these Packers. So,
As we
Dalvin.
mentioned yesterday, by the way, Dalvin Cook is not expected to be on a snap count. So according to the coach, you should expect to deploy him as usual, by the way.
Yeah, our number 4 running back of the week is Dalvin Cook. So you feel awesome about that at this point. And then, yeah, I mean, you're starting Thielen. Look, here's the thing. Thielen has just the craziest wide receiver profile that looks totally unsustainable based on the way that he creates his points. But I just think he's going to be one of those statistical anomalies. That's the way that that's his role in this offense. So you're starting Thielen, you're starting Jefferson. It's a middling matchup. It's the number 18 matchup of the week, but it's fine in this type of game. So yeah, I mean, you're rolling out obviously Dalvin, you're rolling out Thielen, you roll out Jefferson this week. You feel good about all those guys. And to me, that tells me that if I need to play Kirk Cousins this week, I can. I mean, obviously you're not going out of your way, but if that's a guy that you have to consider playing this week, it's not the worst time to play Cousins. It's a number 14 matchup. It's an in-division matchup. I mean, I just expect these teams to be going back and forth. And we've seen even when the Vikings are kind of getting beat up, they seem to heat up late in games and still be able to kind of produce from the fantasy perspective. So that's the way I would look at the Vikings. And then on the Packers side, I mean, we're just hoping, a lot of us are hoping to find out that Aaron Jones is going to be on the sideline again, because if that is the case, then y'all saw how good Jamal Williams looked last week. I mean, we talked about it before the news broke, Yasin. We said, how important is he in fantasy? Because he's one of these high efficiency yield running back handcuffs that nobody talks about in the same discussion with the Snells and the Pollards and the Latavius Murrays and the Madisons and the Edmonds of the world. And heck, I think what we've seen is Jamal Williams might actually belong at the top of that heap. So if you own him, you're certainly hoping Aaron Jones sits one more week and you get to fire him up for the Packers and for your fantasy team.
So let's talk about Tanyan for a second. We did have a question come in asking if he was a 1-week wonder. Just on the injury side, he was upgraded from a limited participant on Wednesday to a full participant on Thursday. I'll double check that while you're answering, but was he a 1-week wonder?
Well, definitely concerned about his snap count. Let's see. So week 6 snap count, 59%, 4 targets, only 25 yards. Jay Sternberger, your guy Matthew Berry's guy out of Texas A&M, 32% snap count, no targets in week 6. So that didn't interfere too much, but yeah, not a big game for Tanyan. You look at week 7, 50% snap count, 2 targets, 32 yards. We know he might not have been totally healthy. Sternberger, same snap count, only 1 target, 1 touchdown. So I think Tanyan's still from what I understand, it's Robert Tonyan, Yasin, like onion.
Look, I'm gonna be straight with everybody here, right? I don't know how to pronounce players' names. I don't know players' faces. So if you put a poll in the Fantasy Life app and it's just the player's face and it doesn't have their name written out, the only way I absorb content about fantasy for the most part is actually written. So I mispronounce names all the time. I also have no idea what they look like. So I skip those polls personally. So let's put that out there.
I think Tanyan is a one. He looks like a 1-week wonder. I mean, if I got to pick one side of the fence, the answer would be yes. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle where he's going to have some usability or production, but it'll be difficult to pinpoint. So yeah,
that's the tight end position, though. That's the tight end position in fantasy. This is why I personally value tight ends. I tend to draft them earlier than most other people because it's really slim pickings when you get to the middle of the season, where it becomes clear that there are 3 or 4 solid tight end options, and then it's basically you're hoping that your guy is putting up an okay number that week. Even Zach Ertz this year. I drafted Zach Ertz as the 3rd tight end off the board, and that did not work out for me personally, but that position is always thin. So I'm not sure, he might be a 1-week wonder, but I feel like there's a lot of 1-week wonders or there's not a lot of reliability when it comes to the tight end position in fantasy. So I think people don't prioritize it as much as they should.
And I think that's when you realize if you happen to own there's streamers that are all basically tight end twos that you're looking at every week, and you're just trying to get the good matchup and cross your fingers and hope it works out. And then you've got your high-end tight end ones that are your must-starts that you feel great about, your Kittles, your Kelseys, maybe your Mark Andrews, your Wallers, right? But then there's what, like 6 to 8 other quote-unquote technically tight end ones that, to your point, you're never going to be able to trust them on a weekly basis. But I think if you own one of those guys, Yasin, you just start them every week, and at the end of the season, the production's there, and you just kind of live with the results. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's why I say go after Janu Smith. It's like the perfect guy. You're right. It's not every week's not going to be a good week for him, but for a player like that, dude, you relinquish the headache of the streamer and the tight end. You got a good player in a good situation. You plug him in every week, and you let the chips fall how they may.
Yeah. So quick shout out to Harmony for answering questions in the chat on YouTube. Thank you. Just so everybody else knows, we are going to be a lot of these questions rapid fire as well once we finish getting through all these games as well. So stay tuned. We're just trying to keep it organized a bit and answering questions as we go along. But we usually do an intense rapid fire question and answer throughout. We'll take 5 minutes here and there to do that.
Trust me, it's very intense.
Yeah. Well, I have the easy. Okay, let's talk. We have this NFC East, man. It's so miserable. All right, let's talk Philadelphia and Dallas on the injury front. Andy Dalton. So let's talk quarterback for a minute. Andy Dalton, even if he is active, which he may be for the game, he's not going to be playing. I think the coach said something along the lines of he will be active as a backup. Byron, we lost you again. I think it's just your camera. I can't hear you, so you might want to use the link I sent you again earlier. But Andy Dalton should be healthy enough for the following game. He's not expected to play even if he's active. He's likely going to be a backup to the rookie out of Dallas. So just know what to expect there. Which, regardless of if it's Dalton or the rookie whose name is escaping me at the moment at Dallas, you shouldn't be expecting much out of this offense, in my opinion. And we do have a lot of questions coming in with what to do about Zeke, so we'll get to some of those. But let's talk Philadelphia and Dallas. We have a lot of questions coming in about the wide receiver makeup in Philadelphia as well. So let's chat. Philadelphia, Dallas, what do you have as the point total?
Well, you mentioned it, Yasin. I mean, the Eagles sit atop the division at 2-4. The Washington football team and the Cowboys are 2-5, and you got the Giants down in the basement at 1-6. You wonder, is this going to be one of these? This is going to be a year where it's some 7-9. I mean, could it even be a 6-10 team that makes the playoffs to just be an absolute abomination? Let's see here. So what we've got for the Philadelphia Eagles at home against the Dallas Cowboys, it's a 43-point expected game total by Vegas. The Eagles are big 9-point favorites. It's an absolute sea of blue on the matchup tool over at rosterwatch.com for all of the Eagles fantasy players. Things look very, very good over there. I think Richard Rodgers, the tight end over there with Philadelphia, is one of the sneaky guys everybody's watching out for. Ertz is out of the picture. Goddard's not back yet. This offense is heating up a little bit. Rodgers is a player we're familiar with, started to show something, and it's a top 5. It's the number 4 matchup of the week for fantasy tight ends, Yasin. And then, I mean, the Cowboys side of the football, I think you're hands off everybody unless Amari Cooper, unless you have to. I mean, you and I began discussing this a few weeks ago about trying to get out from underneath these big name wide receiver or big name Cowboy skill players before the cat totally got out of the bag, that this situation was basically a nightmare and a disaster. You might be able to salvage something with Amari Cooper because his bottom line fantasy box scores have at least looked halfway decent the last few weeks. But man, this is a bad situation, and you're rolling out anybody from the Cowboys side totally begrudgingly, including Dalton Schultz at tight end, including Amari Cooper, probably the only wide receiver you can really consider playing this week. And then unfortunately, forecasted it last week over on the SiriusXM Game Day show on Sunday. I mean, the bad news for Zeke Elliott owners is he's at best a middling to low end RB1 the rest of the season. And really, it's been much worse than that the last few weeks. I'm afraid that, I think with Zeke, you'll see the occasional bounce back, but I'm afraid, I'm very skeptical that we'll see the return of any kind of consistency from Zeke Elliott in the way that we've become accustomed to or had expected on the season. I think you're in a really tough spot if you own Zeke Elliott.
Yeah. So let's take a look at one side of the football with Cooper and the other side. I'm going to mispronounce the name. Fulgham. I'm just going to call him Fulgham. Is it Fulgham?
Fulgham.
I don't know.
Travis Fulgham from Old Dominion, Senior Bowler.
Like I said, I read content. I don't know how to pronounce these guys' names, and that's totally fine with me. So Amari Cooper or Fulgham, who do you got? Josh has the question.
Well, let me go to check the rankings here. So Amari Cooper we have as our number 20 wide receiver, and Travis Fulgham we have as our number 24 wide receiver. I probably maybe playing from behind and still go with Cooper in this one, but that's way closer than it should have ever been.
Yeah.
We're talking about Amari Cooper versus Travis Fulgham in week 8, the fantasy football season, year of our Lord 2020. Yasin, what the hell is going on? Am I in the twilight zone right now?
Yeah, no, I don't think people knew who Travis Fulgham was a few weeks ago, and they shouldn't have known who he was a few weeks ago. And now we're starting him over Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, who everybody had heard about, and who had a very productive early part of the season on a fantastic, high-powered, fantasy-relevant offense. And that offense, we basically faded down to the basement because Dallas was not looking hot.
That thing's been whittled down to the bone in Dallas, man. I think there's about to be a mutiny over there too. So, yeah, you can't play CeeDee Lamb unless it's just a emergency desperation situation.
Yeah. So happy for you guys in Dynasty. Everybody else, I mean, we're just fading CeeDee Lamb at the moment. All right, so we just talked Dallas, Philadelphia. We're not expecting. What is the point total on that again? I think it's actually a decent.
I'd say 40 to 43 points.
Oh, that's pretty low.
Actually. I mean, it's pretty. Yeah, these are bad teams. Really, these are bad teams. Look, I believe we're getting Jalen Reagor, the rookie, back for Philadelphia. That's going to be a very interesting narrative to watch. If he's out there on any of your waiver wires, he should be owned before the games kick off this week. Like, you definitely want to roster him and see what happens. You don't want him hanging out there. Pretty good chance that he's going to demand a higher priority on waivers next week, and it would be smart to be out in front of that.
Okay, so while we're there, let's talk Herbert or Wentz.
Well, I'm pretty sure this is going to be Justin Herbert. Yeah, we have we have Herbert, Tannehill, Wentz back to back in our rankings. I think you can start any of those guys. I mean, it's very difficult not to start Justin Herbert right now. So we've got, that's a tough group to rank, but right now we got Herbert at the top of that group.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move over to. Let's actually answer this question from Rayod. Jimmy Graham or Richard Rodgers this week?
Let's see here. We've got Richard Rodgers at number 9, Jimmy Graham at number 11. So we'll go Richard Rodgers.
Okay. And then I know we already covered the Jets game, but we have a few questions coming in about Pirine. What are we expecting out of Pirine this week? What are we expecting out of him rest of the season? I'll be honest, I don't think I'm smart enough to answer this question. I don't know how to analyze that Jets backfield. And the other thing is, I don't care to put too much time into it personally. It doesn't seem like it's going to yield much. That's not as a New Yorker, that's not a sexy team to follow at the moment. Neither of the teams there are, but for fantasy purposes, I mean, I'm in dire straits in one league where I'm actually rostering Frank Gore and Pirine to see who comes out on top. But I lost a bunch of people to injury. Otherwise, I'm trying to ignore that backfield if possible. What are we expecting out of Pirine?
Well, the good thing is you're not asking me about Samaje Perine in Cincinnati, which is where I thought we were headed with this. And I was about to say, man, that guy runs like he's got oatmeal in his pants. You never want to play Samaje Perine or really even spend 1 minute of your life thinking about him. Now we want to talk about LaMichael Perine with the Jets, a player that we got to see at the Senior Bowl out of the University of Florida this year. You know, he's a bigger body running back. He's got 3-down capability, but that gives him some appeal as a player in the NFL, but he's also just not a guy that really pops in any specific area. So I just think if you look at it, if you're going to own a Jets running back, he's the one to own. He's a pure stash. There could be some limited upside there, but it's a bad situation on a bad team with a bad offensive line, and it's a timeshare. So I think you're only rostering Perine if there's nobody else better out there to stash. Or I mean, you got to have a super thin waiver wire to be spending any time going out of your way to roster LaMichael Perine as a stash. That said, he's not, you can make an argument like he's a reasonable stash. I just don't think you should expect much. If he turns into anything, it'll be like an unexpected boon.
So to answer Mr. Walker's question, do you feel good about starting LaMichael Perine? The answer is no.
Hell no. The answer is hell no.
Okay. The answer is hell no, and I agree with that. All right, let's jump over to, so we've done the Patriots, Bills, we've done Titans, Bengals, we've done Raiders, Browns. We haven't done Colts, Lions. Let's talk Colts. Let's talk Lions. What do you think?
Well, I think that we are getting one of the best fantasy defenses back on the slate this week. And actually, I was surprised to see that the Colts defense had been dropped in one of my leagues. So I was able to scoop them up. I feel pretty nice about that. Indianapolis at Detroit, 3-point favorites, 50-point expected game total. I mean, we got some high scoring expected affairs this week, Yasin. It's going to be fun for fantasy if this pans out. Let's see. For the Colts, the best matchups are for their running backs. It's a top 5 matchup. It's the number 4 matchup of the week for the Colts running backs. So even though the rookie Jonathan Taylor hasn't really looked like the spectacular prospect maybe we all hope for, the fact is he's been producing. He's the best running back they have. He's the lead guy, and he has began to look better every single week. So if you're a Jonathan Taylor owner, you feel pretty good about that this week in this affair. I'd expect the game script to stay pretty manageable from a running back perspective. The wide receivers a pretty good matchup for the Colts, but you'll never be able to pick which one, if any of them are going to, put up, are even capable of putting up anything notable from a fantasy perspective. I mean, Phillip Rivers has an absolute, he looks like a rag, he's a rag arm old man out there. I mean, you're only starting Rivers if like in total desperation, maybe coming off the bye, he'll be a little bit rested, maybe able to do a little bit something there for you. And Trey Burton had kind of been rearing his head there before the bye for the Colts in recent weeks. It's not a great tight end matchup, but I suppose if you're like, again, the audience is very small for guys like this, Yasin, but I suppose if you're in some kind of hell with that situation, then, tight end, maybe Burton is a sneaky deep guy you could take a look at. And, when we flip to the Lions side, I mean, you are not going to want to start Matthew Stafford in this one. It's a lot more concerning to start TJ Hawkinson this week, who has been a good fantasy tight end on the year. He's been very touchdown dependent for the most part. He's had some decent games with yardage, but this is going to be a difficult matchup for the fantasy tight end. So I think Hawkinson is not a must start this week, like maybe he has been in recent weeks. And I mean, you looking at wide receiver, we're hearing a little bit of trade whispers about Kenny Golladay. Surprises me a little bit, but I mean, he's the only receiver you can even consider playing on the Lions side of things. And, of course, DeAndre Swift, the young rookie, seems to be emerging as a solid flex at this point. But again, a tough matchup.
Yeah. Let's talk about Swift. We had a few questions come in involving Swift. So would you trade Henry for Swift, Hunt, and Hilaire? I'm assuming Derrick Henry, considering how much they're looking to get paid for that haul.
If my starting lineup was really thin every week and I had identified the reason that I'm losing, the reason I'm not competitive every week is because I have too many holes in my starting lineup, I would do that trade if none of those guys were going to go to my bench. If they were all going to be starters, and I would not be pushing other good players from my starting lineup to my bench, So if those are all useful players and it makes sense for your roster, I think it's fine to make that trade. I mean, if you're losing, you have to consider liquidating your best players, your best, most marketable players. Sometimes if you're getting a king's ransom like that in return, and they're all guys you can play with decent matchups that you can feel good about owning the rest of the season, I think it's perfectly fine.
Great. Another question with Swift. So Omar Lopez asked if we would trade earlier, but Omar Rodriguez is asking about Kamara, Swift, Edmonds, David Johnson, Antonio Gibson. Should I trade away Johnson or Gibson? And I think the answer is yes, because I think I'm somewhat actually, I think the answer is no, because I'm not too confident with the running backs on your roster. I think I tend to start in a typical 2 running back, 1 flex league. I try to always have my flex be a running back, even in PPR. So assuming you're starting Kamara and David Johnson every week and you're switching back and forth between Gibson and Swift, I think there's too many uncertainties around Edmonds and what his role is going to be when he's sharing that backfield, and if he's going to hold on to the starting role once Drake is back. But my personal thought is, I'm probably not trading away Johnson or Gibson unless I'm getting somebody back that I'm going to always be starting every single week, because you're going to be starting Johnson in most weeks in PPR, in my opinion, and Gibson's going to be a flex most weeks. Byron, I think you probably have a different opinion on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, so the issue here is we haven't been provided any context. When you make fantasy football trades, you have to trade with a purpose. You need to have an objective, a strategic objective in mind. So first and foremost, that means you must have identified your needs. So we need to know, what does this guy need? Like, if he's every week rolling out a crappy wide receiver in his starting lineup, but he's got 2 good running backs on his bench, then yeah, that's what I call a roster balancing trade. If you're deep at one position but short at another, and it's costing you because you have a good guy, a good running back on your bench every week, but you're rolling out some really low-end player wide receiver and he's screwing you every week, yeah, you should trade one of those guys. Actually, I think any of those guys, other than Kamara, I think are available. They're none of them are untouchable. I'd consider trading any of them other than Kamara for another player from another position that would be a must start every week, like you said, Yasin. But first you have to identify, are you even in that situation? You know what I mean? We don't want to just trade to trade. I think in a vacuum, yeah, this guy has enough running backs. If he needs to make a move, he can. I don't think it has to be exclusive to just Gibson or John. I would want to trade the one I could get the most for. Yeah. Between Swift, Edmonds, Johnson, and Gibson. And I'm with you. I still have some concerns about Edmonds' long-term role. There's a lot of hype around him right now. He's pretty marketable. I mean, granted, he's got the bye this week, but I would look at that with anybody but Kamara.
Yeah. So Devontae Parker is expected to play this week. I know there were some concerns because of his practice participation, but he is expected to play. Just as a follow-up, of course, if you guys already have the app, you know that. We just sent that out. I want to backtrack a little bit back to this very hyped up Philadelphia-Dallas game, only because we didn't talk too much about Zeke's trade value, and we had a few questions come in about Zeke. What is a reasonable trade value for Zeke at the moment? I think it's low RB1, high RB2 value that you have with Zeke at the moment, including for the remainder of the season. But as far as trade value, I mean, he still has name value, name recognition, and I think people would love to get somebody who is drafted top 5 overall. So I think you can still get quite a haul for Zeke from hopeful players. But I just don't see them needing – I just don't see that offense trying to do anything but air it out, considering how far from behind they're going to be playing most weeks, in my opinion. And they just seem like a deflated team. So I'm not too hyped up on Zeke. What are your thoughts? What is a reasonable trade offer value for Zeke at the moment?
Well, sometimes players aren't buy lows. They're just bad players that you don't want to have anything to do with, right? And so you've got to be able to recognize and understand the situation. Now, Zeke, a couple of big problems with Zeke. The O-line's a disaster. The whole thing's a disaster. But 12 attempts a game the last 2 weeks and like a 65% snap count. That is a far cry from the Zeke that we've come to know and love, who has always really gotten what we call the Michael Jordan rule in Dallas, where he gets all the volume, all the touches, all the snaps. It's a big issue. So I'm a Zeke owner myself. To your point, a lot of this has to do with how he's viewed in your league. Hopefully, in most leagues, people still think they're quote unquote buying low on Zeke. They still like the name value, and they're not as informed on all these underpinnings that we're discussing here. So that what you say gives me confidence that that may still be the case in a lot of leagues. So if that is the case, then in theory, I want two good startable players in return for Zeke that have good matchups this week and hopefully the next couple of weeks, and guys that I can feel I don't feel just dirty about that I brought them onto my roster. I mean, guys I can feel respectable about owning rest of season that might even have some trade maneuverability with them down the line. So that's where I would start. I think you could also you're obviously not going to trade him for a 1-for-1 for running back. Doesn't make sense. The other option would be, more than likely, maybe you need a wide receiver. If you can get a low end wide receiver 1, or if you can get a wide receiver 1, for Zeke, I think you'd be doing pretty well. Like, I'd probably take Stephon Diggs for Zeke. Somebody like that is probably about where I'm at. Maybe you can get more in your league.
So it looks like this person who asked this question can get more. They're asking if they should trade Zeke for Gaskin and Amari Cooper. And I think the answer there is yes, because Amari is going to see the passing game is going to see a lot more volume than the running game in Dallas. So Amari Cooper is worth it for me. And Myles Gaskin, I think, I think that's a very, not just a fair trade, but I think that's actually the more valuable side is Gaskin and Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, hopefully you're going to be able to play both of those dudes regularly. But even aside from that, look, we're still interested in even building the depth on our team through the trade market at this point. So adding a couple guys like that, especially Dalton returning, I know we don't love Cooper rest of the season, but I think that's a pretty good trade. I would probably do it.
Cool. All right, let's move over to one of the other games. So we talked Minnesota and Green Bay. Since we have Myles Gaskin, why don't we go over to Miami and the Rams? Tell me about their point total. Tell me about what you're expecting out of these players.
Can I give you one little aside? That guy that asked about Antonio Gibson and David John, I'm just thinking about that. The other thing that guy, we were talking trades, the other thing that guy could have done
5 minutes ago.
Sorry, this is he could have taken both of those guys and packaged them together to try to get an elite running back in return. That would have been the other avenue there. So I don't want to leave that on the table. Now we want to talk about Miami and the Rams. Okay, so this is the Los Angeles Rams flying cross country to Miami. 46-point expected game total. The Rams, surprisingly, only a 3.5-point favorite. I think Vegas is giving some love to Brian Flores, the head coach in Miami, who's a really good young head coach. And I think even though it's a kind of a, still a bad young team, he's able to make them a little bit more competitive than you might expect. The best matchup from a fantasy perspective in this one, Yasin, is the number 7 matchup of the week for the Rams running backs. So I think if you've got Darrell Henderson, even if you have Malcolm Brown potentially in this one, this is going to be one of those spots that you feel pretty good about starting, both of them in. It's a middling matchup for both quarterbacks. I think Goff is a player that, you could start him at quarterback if you need to. Obviously, we're going to want to wait and see on Tua Tagovailoa, the rookie quarterback out of Alabama that came off of the hip surgery this last offseason. He's going to get his first start here. I think folks are excited to see, can he be a Burrow? Can he be a Herbert? That's what everybody wants to see, but I think we're just going to want to watch, because I don't want to start my rookie quarterback against somebody like Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. And that brings us to the matchup for Devontae Parker. It sounds like things are trending in the right direction this week, but you certainly get very concerned. Parker isn't a very athletic guy, but you get concerned that against a player like Jalen Ramsey, who's very long, very athletic, it's the exact type of matchup that could be very, very difficult for Devontae Parker. So if you got him, you may have to play him, but I think your expectations have to be probably you're going to have to tap the brakes on those for Parker this week.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about, with the Rams, I know you're talking about the running back matchup, but let's talk quarterbacks for a minute. Goff, look, I've never been a big fan of Goff in fantasy. I know he produces some weeks, but there's a few quarterbacks that I just think are overrated. He's one of them. But let's talk about quarterback play outside of, because we've already discussed Tua. We haven't really touched up on Goff and what he's got going there. What are you expecting out of Goff this week? What are you expecting out of Goff moving forward? What do his upcoming matchups look like?
Well, I mean, you make a good point. It's kind of been middling production on the season out of Goff, which, makes total sense because some games are good and some aren't. So if you look at it on average, it's going to be a pretty middling affair. Again, another guy it's a somewhat low volume passing offense, 31 attempts a game. I mean, it's not high volume. And, I think we know McVay is a run first guy. And I think we also know that McVay is one of these coaches from a fantasy perspective. I mean, he screws people around, man. I mean, that offense is difficult to predict what the game plan is going to be or who it is that's going to kind of blow up on a week to week basis. Let's go ahead and take a look ahead here at Jared Goff's schedule. So after this week, well, it's a bye in week 9 for Jared Goff. So you got decent matchup this week. Then you've got the bye. You're going to come back, get a home game against Seattle, which has been a good spot for fantasy quarterbacks this season. But then it's on the road at Tampa in week 11. That's going to be a difficult matchup. Weeks 12, 13, and 14 are kind of hit or miss, So I think his fantasy playoffs look good. You got the Jets in week 15 and the Seahawks in week 16. So I'd say Goff might be a guy that you're looking kind of at the end of the season, might become a play again, but I think he's pretty mediocre otherwise in terms of fantasy.
Let's do a quick blitz to answer all Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp questions. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. You give me your answer.
Okay.
Mike Evans, Robert Woods, PPR.
Let's see here. So we're going to have Mike Evans.
Robert Woods, Deontay Johnson.
Robert Woods.
Let's go Aguilar and Robert Woods. Which one?
I like Aguilar this week, but he's more of a deep play. Robert Woods.
Yeah, I'd go Robert Woods over Aguilar. General trade question about trading for players with favorable playoff matchups but a lower ranking. For example, trying to get Woods or Kupp with their Week 16 matchup. To your point about Week 16 being Jets, so I think this is really smart thinking ahead. And if you're already going to make it to the playoffs, then I think it's a really smart strategy to, instead of continuing to play to make it to the playoffs, think about what's going to happen towards the tail end of that playoff run. So I think it's a really smart strategy. I think it's forward thinking, and I think this person probably does well in fantasy overall. Do you give a guy like Woods or Kupp a premium to trade for now versus holding on to somebody that might not be as valuable in playoffs but might actually outperform or might be a better player overall currently?
Well, to your point, I think you have to be a winning team that's way in the driver's seat it is a smart strategy to look ahead, but it's also a trap if you're not a winning team that's way out in front in your standings. Oftentimes you can become distracted planning for the future and you can lose sight of winning now, and that can cost you a little bit of fantasy. So assuming this guy who is probably a dominant winning team and has the luxury to look ahead like this, yes, it is smart. Well, I wouldn't assign a premium in the trade market for those. I wouldn't pay a premium for them based on that, but I certainly internally would view them with a premium based on that if that's what I'm looking towards. So yeah, I think that you see extra value in those guys. What I'm saying is I don't think you have to pay up extra for that. It's so far down the road. And also both Woods and Kupps are kind of like buy lows right now. So if that's your state of mind, it's a good time to go after them. And yes, I would assign a premium in the fantasy playoffs to good players that have good matchups, and Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are going to fit that bill.
Yeah. All right. So some updates really quick. So Sammy Watkins is not expected to play on Sunday. versus the Jets. They will give him another week to heal up, according to Jeremy Fowler. And then just a quick update on so Seattle Morning News, Pete Carroll said that Jamal Adams, Chris Carson, and Carlos Hyde are all going to be game time decisions against the 49ers. Hyde's injury, he actually specifically said, might keep him from getting in there. So we're sort of unclear about what's going to happen in Seattle's backfield. So I do want to jump over to talk about the Seattle game and San Francisco. Now they're playing 4:25 Eastern, Seahawks versus 49ers. So let's discuss a little bit about those two teams with the uncertainty around the Seahawks backfield. So why don't we start off with quarterback play?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because Carlos Hyde really could have been in a pretty decent spot this week. So what we've got here is we have the Seahawks at home, 3-point favorites against the 49ers, 54-point expected game total. I think there's going to be definitely some DFS stacks that come out of this one. It's the number 2 matchup of the week for Jimmy Garoppolo, who, as we've seen, like in good matchups, he's certainly capable of big breakouts. Shanahan can dial up a good passing offense. That said, Garoppolo is a guy who is very hit or miss as well. And I think you worry a little bit with Deebo Samuel out of the picture. Does he have, is he going to have enough weapons to really stay in the shootout with the Seahawks? I trust Shanahan will put something together. So if you got to play Garoppolo this week, I mean, it's a decent spot for it. Now, speaking of the wide receiver situation in San Francisco, Yasin, no Deebo Samuel really opens the door for the rookie Brandon Ayuk in the number 1 matchup of the week for fantasy wide receivers. He's going to be one of the most popular plays in DFS this week. And if you own him in season long, I see very few situations where you're not going to want to find a way to get him in.
Yeah. Okay, so let's continue talking about what happens, though, if Deebo Samuel is out for, let's call it another 2 weeks. How does this impact the rest of that team? I think we go back to what it looked like a few weeks ago when he wasn't playing for 3 weeks.
I mean, you worry a little bit. No Deebo Samuel. You've lost Mostert. I think Shanahan can coach around that. Truthfully, he still got Kittle, but I mean, you do have the rookie Ayuk. I mean, I think it all makes it more difficult for Jimmy Garoppolo to be a successful, player. So I think what it means is there's a good chance, though, that the 49ers will be playing from behind. So this is probably just awesome news for Kittle getting massive target volume. And then I think we'll just have to see. I mean, it's going to be very interesting. I'm expecting the rookie JaMychal Hasty out of Baylor, another Senior Bowler, good 3-down capability. I'm expecting him to get the nod this week. Just they've been playing a shell game with Jerick McKinnon. Difficult to understand why. We'll see if that shell game continues this week and who that shifts to. But certainly, I think
the coach after the last game said that Jerick McKinnon, the plan was always to rest him for this past game. So
which is so weird.
Yes. But here's the thing. San Francisco has a luxury. They're really in a luxury position where they can rest their running backs. San Francisco reminds me of the New England Patriots backfield, where you don't know who's going to be playing. The major difference here is whoever does end up playing ends up going off. It's almost more frustrating than having a Patriots backfield guy on your roster. So what can we say about the San Francisco backfield? I think this is, again, the trickiest backfield to analyze as an analyst because, unlike the Patriots, there's not a lot of risk there. You can say whatever you want about the Patriots, and nobody's going to go off out of that backfield with a big game, unless
it's Rex Burkhead in week 3.
Yeah, exactly. But people are expecting that. Out of San Francisco, though, people are expecting somebody to go off, and it's almost luck that an analyst can identify who's going to be going off. So are you feeling lucky, Byron? And do you want to take a stab at who's going to be going off this week and who's projected to get those carries, and are they going to succeed against the Seahawks?
Look, the shell game at the running back position is a long time Shanahan family tradition. This goes back to his father, Mike Shanahan, who'd been coaching since the 80s. And, the thing was, other than like Clinton Portis and Terrell Davis over the years between father and son, Mostert was the only other guy that I can think of that really got the nod from that family and how they treat the running backs. I mean, other than that, it's always been a shell game with the Shanahans, much like that Patriots backfield that you recounted there. The difference is a Shanahan run game it's one of the best in the league. Nobody
Right.
does it better than them. So to your point, somebody's usually going to go off in that situation. Fortunately, this week, I think we can pretty much whittle it down to Hasty and to McKinnon. We know McKinnon was awesome the first part of the season from a fantasy perspective. And then when Mostert was out the first time this year, McKinnon actually picked up some massive volume for a couple weeks, which it makes it difficult to explain how he hasn't been more involved lately. He looked like he could carry a load. I know he's coming off a few years of injury. Maybe they are managing him. I mean, that makes some sense, but he was looking good. He looked healthy. It's difficult to explain. And then based on what we saw last week, based on what we're hearing out of San Francisco, I think you'd have to give Hasty the nod this week. I mean, he seems like he's going to get the first crack. Clearly it could be whoever's going to get the hot hand could kind of, could run away with the situation this week. It's very difficult to predict, but if I had to start one, it would be Hasty based on the information we have. But I think maybe in this situation, Yasin, that they both have flex appeal just because it's kind of a funnel to those two guys. And we know that San Francisco is going to run the ball. And furthermore, both those guys can catch passes, which the 49ers running backs are going to be forced to do in this one.
So just a quick update, by the way, news is coming out that Stephon Gilmore did officially miss today's practice, along with Julian Edelman, as we expected, and Harry. The status for Gilmore against the Bills is in jeopardy on Sunday. So I would say this bumps up your vertical threats on the Buffalo Bills offense. Maybe we're finally going to see that Josh Allen bounce back game.
Yeah, great news for Josh Allen owners. Great news for Stephon Diggs owners.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we talked about the San Francisco backfield. Let's move over to Seattle. This is there's more uncertainty here, right? So Chris Carson, the news came out that it's a midfoot strain, I think was the official initial injury news that came out there. People were expecting him to miss a few weeks. Now, all of a sudden, things are looking up. He's actually a game time decision for the game. And it looks like Carlos Hyde actually won't play. So I'm not sure what this means for the backfield. I expect that to mean that Chris Carson is actually not going to have a big role. He is a game time decision, and if he does play, from an injury that's expected to keep somebody out 2 to 3 weeks, if they are active, I personally never expect them to do a lot of work if they return early from an injury. And I think data backs up that claim, by the way. So assuming that Carlos Hyde isn't playing, assuming that Chris Carson, if he is active, is going to be limited, what are we looking at in that backfield? What are you expecting?
A total mess. And it's unfortunate because from a waiver wire perspective, early in the week, I mean, I know we were worried that Hyde came out of the week 7 matchup kind of banged up. But, when Carson goes down like that, you start saying, gosh, I mean, Hyde can be a really good fill-in player in this situation off the waiver wire. Or if you already happen to roster him, saw he made the big run last week. He looked pretty good. So early in the week, you're very excited about that. At this point, I think we're staring down the barrel of a total mess and a disaster because it's up in the air. It's probably going to be a platoon. Now, if we were to get word that Carson is out and that Hyde is going to go, I think you still can flex Hyde and have some optimism. But I'm very concerned that even if Hyde plays and Carson's out, that this could be a DJ Dallas, Travis Homer. It could be a 3-way committee. Already a team that wasn't running with a lot of volume. I mean, the way that they're passing the football, it raises real concerns. And if there is no Carlos Hyde, then you're stuck picking between DJ Dallas, a rookie, and Travis Homer, a very, a low-end talent in this league. And I just think it becomes a hands-off situation. Just stay out of a crappy situation.
some of our streams are having connection issues. We're trying to restore them, so stand by. But I might need to restart the page briefly. So that said, let's move over to, actually, we had a few questions. We had a specific question about the app itself. So just to answer your question, Average Joe, the Sunday weather updates for the games, they will continue to come out. We typically wait until the games are actually affected by weather to really send them out. So, we haven't really had big weather updates the past few weeks. We started sending them on Sundays. This past Sunday was really our first one. But really, we were sending out, there wasn't much weather impact on the game. So now that the weather is picking up in terms of its potential impact, we will be sending them out more predictably on Sundays, around 11 o'clock Eastern on Sundays. So we talked Kansas City Jets, we talked Vikings Packers, we talked Raiders Browns, Patriots Bills, Titans Bengals, Colts Lions, Dolphins Rams. We have one game left that we didn't discuss yet for the Sunday 1 o'clock slate. You know which one I'm talking about. I'm very curious to know what the point total is going to be on this game according to the sports books. I think this is going to be a sexy, I will watch Sunday football even while I'm working. It's really hard for me to do. I'm going to watch this game of the Steelers versus the Ravens. This has regular. If fantasy football wasn't a thing, this is a cool game to watch for a ton of reasons. Storyline reasons. You have two great teams facing off against each other, and we can talk about why that's so cool from a regular NFL perspective. Byron, why don't you talk to us from a fantasy and sports betting perspective? What does this Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens game have in store for us?
One of the great rivalries in all of football, Yasin. It's been a bloodbath between these two teams every time they've matched up for the last 20 years. I think one takeaway is that while these are both still quality defenses and formidable, they're not the stalwart defenses of years past. And, they actually allow some fantasy production at this point. So I don't think you get totally scared off. It's a 46.5-point projected game total. The Ravens are 4-point favorites. So Pittsburgh comes in a little bit as an underdog, but Ben Roethlisberger comes in with a full complement of weapons. I think how nice it was to see him get Deontay Johnson back last week, and with Juju and Claypool in there, Eric Ebron in there, James Conner in there. That's a pretty damn good offense, Yasin. The best matchups from the Steelers side it's really going to be Ben Roethlisberger. It's a middling matchup there. So if you need to start him this week, I think you could do that and feel okay about it. And then when we look at the Ravens side of the football, again, 4-point favorites at home against the Steelers. It's the number 8 matchup of the week for the fantasy wide receiver. And, we saw Hollywood Brown get an uptick in volume there for a couple of weeks. He got the 8-10 targets a game. And for a player like that, that just means the world to get those couple extra targets a game. We saw that regress a little bit before the bye. But I think in this matchup against the Steelers with all their complement of weapons, this is a sneaky spot coming off the bye and a great matchup. I think we could see Marquise Brown rear his head for the Ravens, Yasin.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to talk more about this game, but just quickly noting that N'Keal Harry did not practice with that concussion. And as Jeff Howe points out, that almost certainly rules him out for Sunday after missing the entire week. So just as a quick update there.
Got to go to the Birdman, Demir Bird, or further down the list to our guy Jacoby Myers out of NC State, man.
New England can go further down that list. I think for fantasy purposes, we don't care. I'm certainly not rostering either of those guys for a short-term pickup on an offense that's struggling. I'm nervous.
What is it? They flap their wings. They do caw caw for the Birdman.
I can't, man.
Demir Bird.
Look, I'm just. It's such a contrast compared to. Well, actually, it's not that much of a contrast compared to years past in terms of fantasy production out of New England, because it's never been a fantasy-heavy team. It's always been a regular NFL football heavy team outside of Tom Brady, really. Yeah, that New England offense just does not look that great with its forward-looking fantasy relevance. Well, let's get back to Ravens and Steelers. Ingram is not practicing again. I've said this before. I don't care about that backfield. That's another one of those backfields that just doesn't get work. So I'm fading all those guys and hoping that somebody will pick up or be willing to take Mark Ingram off my hands if he's on my roster. But I'm not excited about that backfield at all. But he's not practicing. I don't expect him to be able to play on Sunday. Does that mean anything for fantasy? As you guys all know, I don't think so, because it's still the Baltimore backfield. Byron, what are your thoughts on the run game in Baltimore, and what do you expect Lamar Jackson to do in this game?
Yeah, I mean, as a fantasy analyst, I'm very interested in the Ravens backfield this week. First reason is this could be, in theory, this could be a natural juncture in the season for J.K. Dobbins, the rookie out of Ohio State, to finally start to getting some run. Everybody has seen what's happened with DeAndre Swift in Detroit, and it stands to reason that the same type of thing should be in store for J.K. Dobbins sooner than later. So a lot of folks are hoping this is the beginning of J.K. Dobbins' season. To your point, Yasin, I'm circumspect that over the long term, that'll shake. I do think as this team starts to get ready for a playoff run, you'll see Ingram begin to get reintegrated. But certainly that's a big narrative to watch because Dobbins is the future. He's an electric player. That offense needs a player like him out of the backfield. That's why they drafted him. They simply don't have anybody else like it. So from a narrative perspective, very interested to see how J.K. Dobbins is utilized this week, and maybe this could mark the beginning of a more robust second half for him. And then look, I've been to Ravens training camp multiple times. I've told people for years, man, that team loves Gus Edwards.
Excuse me. May I ask a question?
Sure.
So now that you bring up Gus Edwards, who's what I wanted to ask about, you keep talking up J.K. Dobbins, but I keep seeing Gus Edwards as a big running back in front of him, and I feel like that's where the ball's going to go to. I know you're excited about Dobbins. I didn't even want to talk about Baltimore's backfield, but you're making me do it. So I think Gus Edwards is going to get in the way of any sort of breakout for J.K. Dobbins. And again, guys, we talk about variance possibilities, right? Sure, Dobbins could actually break out, and I could be wrong here. But in my opinion, the majority of scenarios is Gus Edwards actually comes away if Mark Ingram can't play with the majority of looks and touches out of that backfield, certainly at the goal line and in short yardage scenarios. So I'm not expecting a big game out of J.K. Dobbins. I'm not excited about J.K. Dobbins. I can't believe I'm saying this in 2020, but I'm more excited about Gus Edwards as a short-term pickup than J.K. Dobbins. Can you convince me otherwise, or maybe don't? What do you think about this?
Well, Yasin, that's because you are a thoughtful, reasonable, rational, driven man. Everything you said makes total sense. So I mean, yeah. Gus Edwards, I think, is probably the safe play. Look, they love him in Baltimore. And not only do they love him in the building there, Gus Edwards is actually a good running back. And if you hear whispers around the league, that's a running back that a lot of teams are looking forward to maybe being able to pick up in free agency next year. So to your point, it's very clear to me he's the guy who gets the Mark Ingram role. And if he can get the Mark Ingram role and the Gus Edwards role, that could be a boon. And I think it makes him a safe play. That said, people are talking about Dobbins, number one, because they're excited just to see what the future is. But number two, he is the upside play. I mean, Gus Edwards could have a multi-touchdown game. That's not out of the question. I see him as a safe play. I see Dobbins as the guy that could go have the big play or do something bananas. Like, he's the guy that can blow the top off. So it's not a guarantee. We're not necessarily expecting it. But that's the way I'd put it, is that Edwards is the safe play. Dobbins is the upside play.
Okay, fair. Let's get out of this backfield, which I didn't want to talk about to begin with. Let's talk about the Steelers' backfield. Let's talk James Conner.
James Conner. I mean, James Conner has been an awesome player on the season. Let me take a look here. I want to look at touches per game. We have James Conner, 18.33 touches per game. Not elite, but that's that level that you're looking for, at least out of like your low end RB1s. He's clearly the lead guy, only 30% touchdown dependent, getting 3.33 targets a game. So I guess there's some things to his profile here that say, okay, Connor his potential is capped. He doesn't have probably the opportunity to be an elite guy, but I mean, he's pretty clearly the lead guy on a good offense, 4.7 yards per attempt. If you've been playing Connor basically every week since week 1, you certainly felt very, very good about it. So, like, I mean, we discussed it earlier. The Ravens aren't an easy matchup, but it's not necessarily the impossible matchup that it used to be. So I think you treat Connor as like a pretty solid low-end RB1. Man, he's coming off an 84% snap count, 23 touch, 5 target, 111-yard performance in week 7. So the volume was certainly there last week.
Yeah. We have a few questions about Lamar Jackson coming in, so I'm going to ask them quickly for you. Let me see if anybody else has any questions here. But Lamar Jackson or Justin Herbert?
Jackson.
Okay. Then we have Jimmy G or Lamar Jackson?
Oh, man, we've come that far. Lamar Jackson.
All right, that's what I figured. I'm in complete agreement with both of those. Okay, so now we've hit all the Sunday 1 o'clock Eastern time games. Let's talk about Broncos and Chargers.
Why don't we hit it off? All right. Well, this is. I'm sorry. What'd you say, Yasin?
Why don't we hit it off with Melvin Gordon, and then we can talk about point total expectations and things like that.
Yeah, well, there's no other place to begin that matchup than a revenge game for Melvin Gordon at home with his new team, the Denver Broncos. He's got the Chargers, the team who refused to pay him the big money, coming to town this week. It's a 44.5-point game total. The Chargers actually 3.5-point favorites on the road. You know, it's interesting. The weather I believe is going to be a lot better this week in Denver than it was last week. That led to kind of a lower scoring affair with the Chiefs. I personally might have expected a little bit higher of a game total on this one, Yasin, just based on the way the Chargers offense has been playing, and the Denver defense is really quite injured. So this is a little bit of a surprising one to see. The best matchup on paper here is the number 7 matchup of the week, actually for Drew Lock, the quarterback of the Denver Broncos. The question is, who is he going to be throwing it to? It's traditionally been a tough matchup against these Chargers corners, but for whatever reason, they've regressed this year and have become more of a middling matchup. You know, Jerry Jeudy hasn't really gotten it done in recent weeks, although it's been tough matchups. Tim Patrick has been kind of a desperation play that I think you can look at. Also a great matchup for Noah Fant and I can hardly say his name, Alberto, we'll just call him, the other young rookie tight end there in Denver. So maybe those guys can get some consideration, especially Fant, if you roster him this week. And then if you take a look at the other side of the matchup, Yasin, it's a difficult matchup for the running backs of the Los Angeles Chargers. It's the number 27 matchup of the week. So I think on the Chargers side, we saw it was totally cannibalistic between Kelly and Jackson last week. Kelly took the lead in terms of the snap count. So to me, this is all about Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Hunter Henry. I just think we've seen that even as good as Herbert is distributing the ball, Mike Williams is not a guy you're going to be able to rely on, even though we saw the massive outburst at New Orleans a couple weeks ago before the bye. I think Mike Williams is more of like a low-end wide receiver 3 that has quite a bit of upside, but you can't be surprised if he's going to blank you. And then we started with Melvin Gordon. It's the number 21 matchup of the week for the Broncos running back. So pretty clear that Gordon is the lead guy there. I think it's a solid start this week. And I think, have we had a Phillip Lindsay update yet today, Yasin? The last I heard, that was still kind of up in the air.
Let's take a quick look. I think he's expected to not play, but give me a second. I can be wrong there.
Yeah, and so I mean, let's talk about it both ways. I think that Melvin Gordon,
so I do have an update. So yesterday he was upgraded from non-participant to limited, that means by definition that he is progressing through the protocol. So it's unclear if he will play. We will have the update out later today when they officially release their practice report. But Philip Lindsay upgraded to limited in concussion protocol is a good sign out of Thursday. So today will be more determinant of whether he'll be available. My guess is he'll be labeled as questionable, and they'll hope to officially clear him with an independent neurologist over the weekend, and he'll be good to go for Sunday. So I think the safe expectation is he'll be able to play.
Yeah, so I would assign RB2 value to Melvin Gordon this week, and I would call Philip Lindsay a flex if he gives it a go.
Okay.
A good flex, a solid flex.
So I told you earlier that I don't know how to pronounce players' names. I don't know their faces. I read, so I don't always know these things. But Albert O's last name is pronounced Okuwebunam.
Okay, Okuwebunam.
Okuwebunam. Or Okuwebunam. I think it's Okuwebunam. So Albert O, also known as Albert Okuwebunam.
Thanks for that.
All right. Yeah, no worries. All right, so let's jump over to, so we talked Denver, we talked Chargers, we answered a bunch of Herbert questions earlier. So we already talked Saints and Bears, we talked Seahawks and 49ers, we talked Eagles and Cowboys. That means we're whittling down to one final game that we haven't discussed on Monday night. And before we do that, I want to recap just because there were a few big injuries that happened yesterday in the Falcons-Panthers game. I want to talk about those players because we also saw a crazy performance out of Curtis Samuel. And then we'll eventually get to Tampa Bay and the New York Giants. I really wonder who's going to win that one. But we should talk about that primetime matchup. And then we'll go down the list and we'll try to do as many rapid-fire question and answers as possible from all the questions that we've gotten in. So talk to me about the Falcons and Panthers and what you're expecting out of these teams moving forward.
I mean, there's nowhere else for me to begin than this. Like, that was an excruciating night, Thursday night, for a lot of fantasy players last night. Like, that was one of those ones where I go to bed in pain. I wake up in pain. I haven't even been able to bring myself to look at my own team this week to see the carnage from last night. It was if you started anybody from the Panthers side, you feel like crap today, unless it was Curtis Samuel, which, like you say, it was probably a pretty small audience, Yasin. So what do I make of those teams moving forward? I'll always begin by saying you got to, if you're going to prognosticate, you need to look at the schedules ahead. So I think it's pretty clear at this point that we got to look out for Calvin Ridley's injury status. Think Todd Gurley is a horse that we've been riding hard all season, really the last 4 to 6 weeks, based on some awesome matchups. But we know that his underlying fantasy profile is one that concerns us. So I think this is a time to consider maybe shopping high, selling high on Todd Gurley and getting out of that business the rest of the season. Certainly not a must sell, but I would definitely look at that. And then on the Panthers side of things, Robbie Anderson, that thing's kind of dried up. DJ Moore, those guys are just hit and miss, man. Those guys feel more like awesome wide receiver threes at this point than anything else. I know Robbie Anderson had like second most receiving yards in the league going into last night, but just neither of them are people that you can really count on. I think fortunately for Christian McCaffrey owners, the Panthers have been able to stay competitive in his absence. And there were a lot of concerns early season that if the Panthers, went to absolute, disaster, that Christian McCaffrey might not get his full workload when he returns, especially how good Mike Davis has looked. I think hopefully we're in a pretty good situation there with McCaffrey, just based on the fact that the Panthers have at least been able to stay, a competitive team. But Teddy Bridgewater, how can you ever trust him again, man? I played him last night. It's the number one matchup in all of fantasy. Got 25 points against the Falcons just a few weeks ago. And the offensive line looked horrible, and he's got a rag arm, man. He's got a rag arm. So, you can spot start him in a great matchup, but he's a liability too. So I think that the sheen has come off of early season Teddy Bridgewater as well.
All right. Well, you talked about all the negatives out of that game. There is one really big positive.
Julio?
Julio is right. I mean, PPR, this guy, how many points? I can't even count that high. What did he have last night? I think it was 137 yards on seven receptions, 10 receptions, 13 targets. I can't remember the exact numbers. Somewhere between 10 and 13 targets. I think it was somewhere between 7 and 10 receptions.
10 targets, 7 receptions, $137.
There we go. That's that Friday afternoon brain working with that memory.
Hard to believe Julio now in his 10th year in the league. Yeah, 10th year in the league. And I'll tell you what, he still looks like he's at the top of his game when he's healthy. He's just a freak, man. He's an all-time freak at the wide receiver position. One of the best I've ever seen at a training camp. I've never seen anybody else like him at the wide receiver position.
Who are other people that are up there with him? I mean, have you seen Odell at a training camp?
I've seen Odell not at training camp, but I've seen him live at LSU Pro Day, which was spectacular. Odell, we were very high on Odell coming out. I'd say Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, those guys are like, a notch below Julio. Calvin Ridley has actually looked pretty good at training camp. Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen, two guys that can separate, two of the best route runners in the league that can separate against just about anybody. I'd say those are all players that are up there. I know I'm leaving some out at this point, but Julio Jones stands atop that all of the mountain all on his own, man. I've never seen anybody else like him.
Good insight. Okay, let's so look, we've hit all the games. We hit Falcons, Panthers. I feel like you didn't talk enough about Todd Gurley because I think you have more opinions on Gurley than you shared.
Well, like I said, Gurley's a horse. Like a lot of people were down on Gurley. We made sure to draft a good amount of Gurley over at Rosterwatch this year. Just circumstantially, we understood it was likely to be a serviceable play, even if it was not going to be sexy or there were going to be underlying holes in his profile. And look, we told you to trade for him about 4 or 6 weeks ago because he had a great schedule ahead and just to ride that horse. And he's really delivered, man. He's really delivered. But certainly I think you're concerned that that's going to regress. And again, I think Gurley is a potential sell high candidate. Let me go ahead and let's take a look here. When we're talking about the future, we always want to have a look at the schedule ahead. So I
think what we're going to find with the schedule is that he ends up becoming more and more of a sell high candidate because of his upcoming schedule. I think his his perceived value is going to increase.
Yeah, and here's the thing. They've got Denver at home next week, and then it's a bye in week 10. So, I mean, obviously, if you're going to try to get out of the Gurley business, especially for the late season stretch, you get a little maybe more concerned about. You're going to be nice to get out before that bye week after you've kind of after you've been able to kind of reap all the fruits of this really tremendous schedule that he's had for quite some time now. Yeah, it's after the bye. It's New Orleans, Las Vegas, New Orleans, the Chargers, the Bucks, and the Chiefs. So it's really that playoff schedule could get a little bit ugly for Todd Gurley.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. So basically sell high before playoffs start because you might have cashed in on all of his value before playoffs.
Yeah, and I would try to do it before his week 10 bye, which means that next week would be a good time to begin shopping him and see what's out there.
Got it. All right. So we have one final matchup to go through, and then we're going to hit all these questions as quickly as possible. This is a tough one to pick. I mean, if I'm trying to think, who's going to win this game between Tampa Bay and the New York Giants, I really don't know. It seems to be a tough matchup on both sides. So, all right, here, getting curious. So, news came out this morning about the Giants getting their close contacts cleared from COVID isolation. So they'll be back. So the majority of their offensive line is going to be okay. I don't know that makes a difference. They're still the Giants. I don't know that their second string would perform worse than their first string. So you have Devonta Freeman, who I don't even know if he's going to play. We have Daniel Jones. You have a few offensive guys that can maybe catch a few passes on the Giants, but they're going up against a really stingy Tampa Bay defense. And then they're going to be, in my opinion, I think the Giants are going to have to air it out the entire game because they're going to be trailing behind Tampa Bay. at a wider and wider margin as the game goes on. Tampa Bay, I think the only thing that makes me nervous is that they're going to stop playing all their starters early in this game. They might even sit Tom Brady and give him a breather. So what does this look like for guys like Mike Evans? What does it look like for this? This is another one of those running back by committee-ish type situations. What are we looking at in this game on Monday night? Are you trying to start as many Tampa Bay players as possible?
Well, I mean, I don't ever think that's a horrible idea, just buying into that offense if you're not sure what to do, or sometimes you get a couple of guys on that offense and just make sure that you kind of monopolize whatever action's going to come out of that matchup. But I mean, you do raise a good point. 11.5-point favorites on the road at the Giants, and a lowly 45-point expected game total. Now, hell, it may be that Vegas expects Tampa Bay to score all 45 of those points. So if that's the case, you'll be in pretty good shape with their fantasy players. Now, look, I don't think there's a single solitary guy you could start from the Giants side of the ball unless you're in absolute desperation mode. And if you are in desperation mode, those guys would, of course, be Evan Ingram begrudgingly at the tight end position. I think Darius Slayton is a play that you're really not very excited about, because Carlton Davis is a really tough cornerback that I think matches up well with a long physical receiver like Slayton. That said, he's a guy who can get the big play over on you. So I guess, he may have a little bit of value from that perspective. I think, we saw Sterling Shepard return, begin to rear his head. It's not a sexy play, but if you're really desperate, I think Shepard's the other guy you can look at that might have actually a better matchup there from the slot than any of the outside guys for the Giants. So I'd say the last thing is, if we get word there's no Devontae Freeman, then it appears that Wayne Gallman is the guy that's getting like the majority of the action. Now, again, it's a bad play. All of those plays are bad plays, Yasin. But if I'm going to break down the Giants side, that's the way I look at it. I mean, those are the only players I would even consider, and it would only be if I was in an absolute emergency.
Got it. Well, look, I don't want to. I think this isn't a game that many people are going to be asking questions about, Giants and Bucks. So I'm going to end it there. What I do want to do is let's jump into some of these questions and maybe do some rapid fire question and answer coming from Facebook and from YouTube. And then I'll try to go into the app and see if anybody posted comments. Actually, we got a ton of comments on the post. But for the live streams, we try to keep it to YouTube and Facebook. So let's take a look. Defense question from Lewis. Which defense, 49ers, Saints, or Titans?
I'd start the Saints or the Titans. Probably go with the Saints defense there.
Okay. Are we starting Ronald Jones over Zeke this week?
Let me take a look at our rankings. I may, in fact, do that. By the way, and we're talking about that matchup, I do think it's a sneaky matchup for Leonard Fournette. If you own him, it could be just the kind of game that he gets a lot of work in. I mean, that could also be true for Ronald Jones, but you just expect if it turns into a blowout, more likely to be Fournette than Ronald Jones, the starter. So we have Ronald Jones as our running back 15, and we have Zeke as our running back 11. So I still got to give the nod to Zeke just based on, it's maybe a little bit less of a cannibalistic situation. But I'll tell you, me personally, I have Zeke at 13 and I have Jones at 17. So it's gotten a lot closer than you would have ever thought.
Got it. Just as an update to everybody, the Browns did, in fact, rule out Austin Hooper because of his appendectomy. So I think that there's two tight end options outside of him in Cleveland, and that's Bryant and Njoku, and I think the nod goes to Bryant at this point. Was the proof there?
Yeah, they're invested in the future with him. That organization's very sour on Njoku, and they have
I'm expecting him to get traded over the next week, but time will tell. Trade question: is Gurley for Taylor and Watson a good trade?
Hell yeah, it is, especially if you need a quarterback. I think that's just fine. Richard
Rodgers or TJ Hawkinson?
We're going to have Richard Rodgers higher in the ranking this week. It's the worst matchup in the league for Hawkinson. who's been living on getting in the end zone.
Yeah. Start 2 in PPR, Gio, Hilaire, or Hollywood Brown?
Ooh. Probably going to be Gio and Hilaire. I mean, I like all three of those guys, but I probably just roll the 2 running backs in that one.
Yeah. Are we trading Eckler if I just lost of my? Yeah. Okay. So this has less to do with this has more to do with like strategy around fantasy. If you're continuing to lose and you're not in a winning position, you need to sort of trade away your one really startable player, especially because he's on IR. So I don't know what you're going to get back for him. But like I actually just flipped Chris Carson because I'm in a league where I lost a bunch of people. It's a league where I lost a ton of people to IR this year. I just traded away Chris Carson for 2 startable players because that's a guy that he's one spot on my roster, but I need starters. So yeah, depending on your position, if you need starters and you need to give up 1 starter to get 2 back, that's actually you're going to be trading down. Neither one of them is going to be as good as Eckler when he comes back. But you need to improve your roster all around. So I'd say, yeah, you could be at the point where you should be trading away a solid starter if you can get 2 startable candidates in return. Do you disagree or agree, Byron?
I mean, it's the classic situation, and it's the classic formula for a liquidation trade, which is exactly what this is. And you said it right. He needs to get 2 good players with good matchups that he could start this week in return that can help him win now, and that he can also feel good about rest of season.
Yeah. Do we think Jonathan Taylor is going to be one of the better running backs in the second half of the year?
You take a look at his schedule. I mean, he's been – I think so. I mean, based on the state of the position, I mean, he hasn't really been as good as we want. But, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, he's performed – let's see. I'm looking half-point PPR here. 5 out of 6 games on the season – Jonathan Taylor's been double-digit points. We haven't really gotten the volume we totally want yet, but by in the rearview mirror, we got Detroit, Baltimore, Tennessee, Green Bay, Tennessee, Houston, Las Vegas, Houston. I mean, you're going to love that schedule from week 10 through week 15. And let me just see if we were using this week's matchup ratings. What did we have? We had Jonathan Taylor this week. Let's see, against Detroit. Yeah, hell, it's the number 4 matchup of the week. Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Taylor has a great schedule the rest of the way, and the buy in the rearview mirror, and he's a burgeoning young player. So, yeah, I think given the state of how crappy guys like all the injuries, guys like Zeke looking like an RB2 or, not what he was, yeah, I think all of that makes Jonathan Taylor a perfect candidate to be a really good player down the stretch.
All right, we got to wrap up in 6 minutes. We're going to try to go for as many quick, rapid-fire question and answers as possible. So I'm going to try to pick the answers. I'm going to try to pick the questions that have 1-word answers. Byron, you're on the clock. Malcolm Brown, Brandon Ayuk.
Ayuk.
Are we starting Bernard over Justin Jackson?
Yes.
Herbert, Tannehill. We answered this already. The answer was? I don't remember.
Herbert. It was Herbert. I'm nervous. I got those guys back to back in the rankings. A little nervous about that one, but we got Herbert. If you're goosey, Tannehill is just a fine play. We got him back to back.
Rashard Higgins or Cole Beasley? Assume PPR, and I'm going Cole Beasley.
I'm gonna go Higgins.
Stephon Gilmore's out. I don't know that affects Beasley anyway, but I like Cole Beasley. I always have. Fire rapper too.
I like Beasley. I mean, you should see that guy. He's got some real ups, man. I'll have to share. I'll tell you about it sometime. Go ahead.
All right. Colts D, Rams D this week.
Colts D or Rams D? Colts D.
Curtis Samuel, Mike Williams, rest of season. I'll answer this. I have an opinion here. I think it's Mike Williams.
Yeah, I mean, they're both going to be hit or miss, but I'd rather hitch my wagon to Justin Herbert. And in the end, Williams should be the clear 2 there.
We'll have to see. 30 words more than 1 word.
I'm sorry. I'm an analyst, dude.
I know. I'll keep you short. Start 1 at flex. Hollywood, Deontay Johnson, Galladay, Justin Jefferson. Starters are Boyd and Metcalf. I'm starting Galladay.
Yeah, Galladay is going to be ranked the highest.
Okay. RB for flex. Gio, RB and flex. Gio, Boyd, Evans, Carson, if he plays, and Hyde.
RB and flex.
I'm going Gio and Evans because I'm nervous
Yes.
about Carson playing.
Gio and Evans.
I don't know that he'll have a good game
Gio
script.
and Evans. Yep.
Nah, that was like 10 words too many for me that time. Hasty or Ruggs in PPR?
You know what? I might go with Ruggs in this one.
Okay. 2 in PPR. We answered this one. Saints or Bears defense?
Bears. Hopefully we get Khalil Mack in there, but probably Bears. I mean, last I heard, no Emmanuel Sanders, no Michael Thomas. So.
One word answer: is Metcalf? Is his production going to decrease? One word answer.
It's going to increase.
Okay. Thoughts on Antonio Brown? One word answer.
Good.
Okay. Le'Veon Bell or Montgomery this week?
Dude, I think I might roll Bell.
Okay, interesting. Hasty or Bernard in PPR? I'm going Bernard.
Yep.
Not you, Siri. Leave me alone. Let's see. Okay. Richard Rodgers or Hunter Henry?
I think that's going to be Hunter Henry. Let me take a look.
2 minutes left. I'm going to try to get
Hunter Henry.
Scotty Miller or Ayuk?
Ayuk.
Flex option, AJ Green or Swift?
Probably Swift.
Best flex option in PPR, Fulgham, Kupp, T. Higgins, Swift, or Scotty Miller?
I'd probably go with T. Higgins.
I'm thinking that too. That's not a question. Gio or Hasty? We answered Gio. Kupp or Le'Veon in PPR?
Probably go with Kupp.
Tunyon or Cook?
Cook.
Okay. Let me go to the more recent questions for people that are live right now. Ravens D, Colts D. I'm going Colts D.
Colts D.
Fournette or in flex, Fournette, Scotty Miller, or Aguilar?
I think I might go Fournette.
Okay. Evans or Kupp, half-point PPR?
Evans.
1 minute. Evans, okay. Metcalf or Allen Robinson? I think Allen Robinson because I think Metcalf because Allen Robinson might not play.
Yep.
Galladay or Diggs rest of season? I'm assuming this is regarding a trade.
I'll go with Galladay.
Gordon or Henderson?
Probably Gordon.
15. All right, guys. We tried to hit as many as possible. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. Look, join us again next week. I'm going to be a typical YouTube hero here who doesn't know what the heck he's doing. Like, subscribe, comment, blah, 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 blah. Thanks for joining us. This is Yasin from the Fantasy Life app, Byron from Rosterwatch. We'll be back again next week. We'll see you in the app. I'm at Yasin, Yasin in the app. I'm You Found Yasin on Twitter. Byron, if you want to drop your handles.
Yeah, on Fantasy Life app, I'm at Rosterwatch_Byron. And of course, we urge you guys to please go subscribe to the Rosterwatch channel on YouTube, to the Rosterwatch podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms, and follow us on Twitter at Rosterwatch, and check us out over at the site rosterwatch.com.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Again, we really appreciate you guys joining. This is actually a lot of fun for us. So thank you. Take care, guys. Good luck this week.